After my husband passed, I kept quiet about the house, the 2 cars, and the bank account left solely in my name. When my son tried to force papers in front of me, my heart broke, but my resolve only grew stronger. I calmly laid out proof he never expected and watched his confidence crumble. That was just the beginning of what came next. Before I share the story, I'd love to know, how are you doing today? And where are you listening from? What? The church bells tolled slow and heavy that morning, the sound drifting through the thick Charleston air like a hymn stretched too long. Spanish moss dangled from the oaks outside the Baptist church, swaying with a kind of weary grace. The humidity clung to my skin as if it wanted to hold me in place, but I walked forward with my head high. My name is Odessa Marin Whitlow, 67 years old, a widow now. People whispered and nodded when they saw me, but my mind was fixed on the wooden casket at the front. I grieved. Yes, but beneath my grief was something else resolve. My husband had not left me defenseless, no matter what anyone assumed. The organ hummed its low song, and I noticed how folks leaned in to study one another, almost more than they studied the pulpit. In the South, funerals are less about the dead and more about the living keeping score. When the service ended, I tried to steady myself on the cool brass handle of the pew. I thought the hardest part was over until I saw my son moving toward me. Darian's tall frame cut across the aisle with a sharpness that didn't match the occasion. He was 42, dressed sharp in his suit, but his eyes were hard and his jaw tight. He leaned close and whispered, though not low enough to escape notice, "Mama, give me the house keys. Right now." His hand extended, palm open like it was his birthright. The room shifted. I felt the gaze of cousins, neighbors, and church folk pressing down on me. My own hand froze around my purse strap, knuckles white. My eyes stung, but I refused to bow. He wanted control before the flowers had even wilted. Some folks can't wait for the dust to settle before they show their true colors. I looked at him, not with pleading, but with a steady silence that made his hand tremble ever so slightly before he pulled it back. I did not speak the truth out loud, not then. The truth was mine to carry, the house deed, the titles to both cars, and the bank account, all in my name. My husband had seen the storm coming long before I did. He left me safeguarded, not because he doubted my strength, but because he knew our son's weakness. I remembered his words at the kitchen table months before his passing. "You'll need the armor. Odessa. Don't let anyone strip you of what's rightfully yours." So I chose silence, even in the face of Darian's cruelty. My mother had taught me years ago, don't show all your cards at the first hand. That wisdom wrapped around me like a shield. Anger would only expose me. Patience would protect me. As we left the church, I heard the rustle of whispers trailing behind us. Cousin Ellen leaned into another woman, shaking her head. I knew how this would spread. Darian demanding the keys while I stood mute. To some, that silence would look like surrender. To others, it might look like guilt. I felt the first ripple of how quickly a family's story can be twisted by one brazen act. Respect is not inherited. It's earned. And it can be lost in one afternoon. I understood then that Darian's demand wasn't just about keys. It was about control, about reshaping the story of who held what. I walked out into the brightness, my purse tight against me, the keys pressing into my palm. I whispered to myself, "Steady as a prayer. These stay with me." But little did I know, the papers he brought to me a week later would nearly break me. A week after the funeral, my house was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The mornings dragged, the blinds letting in a gray light that made the walls look older than they were. I cooked small meals just to keep the routine: eggs, grits, coffee in a chipped mug, but the silence pressed down harder than the weight of the southern heat. My husband's humming used to fill the space. Now all I heard was the tick of the clock above the stove. I was folding towels with edges lined up sharp when my phone buzzed. Darian's name lit the screen, followed by a message: "We need to handle the house and cars soon." A second ping came, a calendar invite he created without asking. My stomach tightened. Grief keeps its own calendar. Greed keeps a stopwatch. I smoothed the towel once more and stacked it carefully, refusing to let his urgency throw me off balance. That afternoon, the knock on my door came heavy, as if someone meant to rattle the hinges. Darian stepped in with Isolde close behind, carrying a leather portfolio stuffed with papers still warm from the printer. They spread the stack across my kitchen table like it was their stage. Quit claim deed, car title transfers. A power of attorney already filled with my name in block letters, it all slid toward me under their steady hands. Isolde pointed to sticky notes marked with arrows. It just needs your signature and a notary. We can call one in. Her voice carried syrup, but the sweetness burned. I read each line slowly, noticing the gaps, vague terms, missing clauses, blank spaces where details should live. My hand stayed folded in my lap. I never sign under pressure. I said, my tone even. If it's right for me, it'll be right tomorrow. Darian's jaw flexed, and the polite mask cracked just a little. I slipped my phone out, snapping pictures under the pretense of sending recipes. In America, if someone rushes your pen, they're after your pocket. I slid the stack back toward him. Steady as a tide. I'll have my counsel review this. I didn't say whose counsel knowledge is power, and timing is everything. Isolde leaned in, eyebrows lifted. We're only trying to help. Taxes. Probate, it's standard. I smiled, thin and unwavering. Then it'll stand up in daylight. Darian tapped the table, pushing a pen closer, but I kept my hands still. Posture is a boundary no one can cross. Escorting them to the porch, I let the thick air make them shift in their polished shoes. Their irritation followed them down the steps, but my calm followed me back inside. Sunday came, and with it, another wound. After church, as we filed into the parking lot, Darian revved the Lexus SUV. My inheritance, he announced, loud enough for every deacon within earshot. Isolde lifted her phone, laughing lightly, catching it all on video. Heads turned, whispers stirred. The engine roared as if mocking me, and he popped the trunk to display a polished shine, like possession could be declared by wax. My chest burned, but I stayed silent. Community is a jury that doesn't wait for a summons. The loudest claim on a thing is not ownership, it's insecurity in a suit. Back home, I took my measures. Each page was scanned, archived, and stored in a fireproof box. I set alerts on my bank, added verbal passphrases, removed dormant names. I wrote down VINs, photographed the cars, time-stamped every file, and in my grief journal, I wrote 2 lines, one for love, one for boundaries. Locks aren't just on doors, they're on habits, accounts, and choices. That night, the text came. We're bringing a notary at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Make coffee. Seconds later, Isolde added, family should act like family. I set the kettle for tea instead, laid a yellow pad on the table, and wrote my questions sharp, factual, and ready. A calm no can move mountains, a scream can't. At 10 sharp, I opened my front door. The morning air still carrying a trace of dew. Darian stood there, shoulders squared like he owned the threshold. I stepped back just enough to let him in and gestured toward the chair his father had always claimed at the kitchen table. Sit there, I said, and the words carried more weight than any sermon he'd heard. I placed my yellow legal pad in front of me. 3 questions written bold across the top. No coffee, no small talk, just business. His knee bounced under the table, fingers tapping, restless on the wood. His eyes darted toward the counter where the keys once lay. I kept my voice steady, even. We do this clean and we do this slow. I wasn't born yesterday, and I don't plan to die naive. The knock at the door hadn't cooled before Isolde let herself in, her smile polished but brittle. Behind her, Leif was dropped off early by a neighbor, his school backpack slung too heavy for his small frame. Isolde leaned against the doorway, eyes sharp as glass. Odessa, she said sweetly. This is complicated. You're too old to manage these things alone. The words fell heavy in the room, and I saw Leif's shoulders dip. My hands stayed flat on the table, showing him that his grandmother was not shaken. I answered loud enough for him to hear every syllable. Age is not incompetence. I've paid these taxes 30 years running. Darian shifted uneasily, trying to soften the edges, but the glance he shared with Isolde told me their script had been rehearsed. I rose, walked Leaf to the pantry, pressed a granola bar into his hand. Your grandmother's fine, I told him, plain and calm. Folks confuse kindness with weakness until they meet a boundary. When I returned to the table, I laid it out plain. From this day forward, all contact goes through counsel. Any paper arrives 72 hours before discussion. No exceptions. I spoke each flaw in their documents, slowly missing consideration. Endless power of attorney, wrong property descriptions. Isolde offered her syrupy voice about probate, but I cut her off. The will is settled. The titles are mine. Darian slid the pen forward again. I slid it back. Same distance, same calm. Finally, I rose, walked them to the door, and placed my hand on the frame. That's all for today. You don't fix a bad deal by signing it faster. Late afternoon brought a new insult. From my porch, I watched Darian and Isolde return with two friends dressed sharp, whispering about paint colors as if walls already belonged to them. Isolde waved a realtor's card like a prize ribbon. Just a peek, she said lightly. I stood in the doorway, one pivot of my body blocking 4. Showings require an owner. They tried to brush past, but my hand on the doorframe held firm. Neighbors across the street slowed their steps, eyes narrowing. Not today, I said, the screen latch clicking behind me. If you don't guard your porch, don't be shocked when strangers rearrange your furniture. They retreated with murmurs trailing behind them. I stepped back inside, picked up the phone, and dialed. My voice carried steady as I spoke his name aloud for the first time in their hearing. Cyrus Alden Vexley. Let them know the line had been drawn. Cyrus's office smelled faintly of leather and lemon polish, the kind of scent that tells you things are put in order here. I laid the papers across his mahogany desk, originals and scans in tidy stacks. He didn't rush, he never did. He slid on his reading glasses, uncapped a red pen, and began. The ink moved steadily, circling gaps in consideration, slashing through an overreaching power of attorney, underlining mismatched legal descriptions that had no business being on the same page. He paused at a font change, arching his brow. Sloppy forgery, he muttered, tapping the margin. The notary block lacked a commission number, another red flag. My chest loosened as his pen carved through their schemes. Truth doesn't mind a magnifying glass. Only lies squint, he said quietly. For the first time in a week, I felt something close to hope. He leaned back, folding his hands. Here's the playbook. Odessa. No signatures outside counsel. No hallway chats. Everything on record. I nodded, jotting notes as fast as his words came. We drafted 3 bullet questions to anchor me if things turned heated, and a plain refusal statement in my own voice, short, firm, unmistakable. If they push, Cyrus said. You read it aloud. Once. He would serve as witness, not combatant, letting the facts do the cutting. I texted Darian a neutral invite 1 o'clock. My front room, all parties present. No surprises. Boundaries are just rules you're willing to keep when someone else won't. At noon, I set the room like a courtroom chairs squared, documents stacked, the wall clock in plain sight. When Darian and Isolde arrived, I greeted them with no warmth and sat first. We'll start with yesterday's questions, I said. My voice carried steady, measured. Isolde tried her rehearsed line. These are standard forms. I pressed. Cite the statute. Who prepared them? What license number? Darian shoved a pen toward me, his fingers twitching. I folded my hands in my lap and met his stare. The room felt tight, but I owned the pace. Politeness isn't surrender. It's choosing the terms of the fight. When the silence stretched, I pulled out my 1-page refusal. Each sentence fell like a gavel I would not sign. I slid their stack back untouched, then placed my copies of titles and a bank confirmation letter on top. Ownership was not up for debate. Cyrus cleared his throat, explaining every red mark missing clauses, false references, gaps wide enough for fraud to slip through. The air thinned as each flaw landed. Isolde sputtered about urgency. I asked, urgent for whom Darian bristled, "Are you questioning my loyalty?" I didn't blink. I'm protecting my future, not grading your intentions. If a bridge seems shaky, you don't run faster, you step back. I rose, ushered them toward the porch. My hand on the door frame was the final word. Cyrus nodded once. The ledger of truth closed for today. Their car rolled away slow, brake lights glowing like an afterthought. My phone buzzed before they hit the corner of Bank Alert at an odd hour, numbers shifting where they shouldn't. I stood still in the threshold, rain in the air, the taste of trouble sharp on my tongue. Peace is not quiet. It's knowing where you stand when the phone rings. The envelope in my mailbox had no return address, just a handwritten note from Darian's cousin inviting me to supper. It read more like a summons than a family gesture. I took my time dressing that evening, my navy dress pressed. The pearl necklace my husband once clasped around my neck, polished until it caught the light. The keys rested in my handbag, weighty and certain. Walking into that house, I smelled cornbread, collard greens, and roast chicken. Yet the real seasoning in the air was scrutiny. Eyes measured me more than they welcomed. In some houses, the table is set for conversation. In others, it's set for ambush. Halfway through the meal, as butter dishes passed and sweet tea refilled, Isolde rose with her wine glass tilted high. Her words rang, rehearsed. Odessa's been through so much. It's time Darian stepped up as head of the household now. Forks froze midair, and silence took its seat at the table. My pulse steadied instead of racing. I laid my napkin down and stood. This house already has a head, I said. Voice calm but carrying, and he left it in my name. I pulled a folded slip from my purse, a receipt for last year's property taxes. Stamped and signed, I've managed this home, paid for it, kept it standing. That hasn't changed. Eyes shifted around the table. Some fell to their plates. Others flicked nervously toward Isolde. If you let someone rewrite your story at the table, don't be shocked when they eat your portion. Darian, never content to let silence settle, unfolded a sheet of paper he'd tucked beside his plate. He cleared his throat, waving it like evidence. Mother owes me. Loans I gave her during Father's illness. I covered what she couldn't. His voice carried that measured cadence that comes from practice. I accepted the paper. Read quickly typed text. No dates, no numbers, no signatures. Not a contract, just ink on a blank wind. I set it back in front of him. That isn't debt, that's imagination on letterhead. A ripple passed through the table. Cousins whispering. An aunt shaking her head. The chandelier light suddenly hotter than before. Darian's eyes flashed, but he didn't speak. Bring it to court if you believe it. I told him evenly. A lie at supper tastes sweet until the truth is served for dessert. I sat back down, lifted my fork, and resumed eating. Dignity tastes better than indignation. My silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The courtroom is where debt is measured, not a dinner table with greasy napkins and gossip. I looked around once more. Some relatives avoided my eyes, but a few met mine with something close to respect. When the peach cobbler came out steaming, I rose, slid on my coat, and left before dessert touched my lips. You don't win every round by striking. Sometimes you win by refusing the wrong arena. At home. The kitchen clock ticked past 9 as I set my bag down. The answering machine blinked red. A single message, marked urgent, waited. My hand hovered over the receiver, the house quiet but charged. By the time I pressed play, the banker's voice told me something Darian never expected me to hear first. The voicemail from the bank still echoed in my head when I woke. Attempted inquiry denied. The message said, crisp as cold steel. Someone had tried to slip past my passphrase in the night. I sat at the kitchen table with my yellow legal pad, listing tasks line by line, call the banker back, verify locks on transfers, print balance letters, file them in order, paper over panic. I texted Cyrus, we need a sit down. His reply came quick. Witnesses ready. I unlocked the fireproof box, laid out the house title, carve-in photos, and last week's bank letter. I spoke my lines under my breath. Short and factual. Hope is not a plan. Paper is that afternoon, in the school pickup line. Leif slid into my car, backpack straps slipping from his small shoulders. His eyes were wide, too old for his years. "Dad says Grandma can't handle money," he whispered, voice caught between loyalty and confusion. My heart ached, but my voice stayed calm. Sometimes people say things to get what they want. Money isn't love, and love doesn't come with receipts. He looked down at his shoes, then back at me. I reminded him how I taught his father to budget when he was a teenager, how lessons written in notebooks outlasted excuses. "You'll always have a roof here, baby. No matter what noise swirls outside, children hear the quiet truth in how we live, not the loud claims people make." Back home, Darian showed up unannounced, his steps sharp on my hallway floor. He swung his arm carelessly and knocked the mantel clock to the ground, the one my husband's father gave us. The glass splintered. Silence rushing in where its steady tick had lived for decades. "It's just a thing." Darian scoffed, but he knew better. I crouched, gathering the shards in my palm, their edges biting. Some things are more than objects. They're promises you can touch. My voice was low but steady. You don't break your way into a future. You earn it. I slid the cracked face into a plastic bag, not for revenge, but for record. When someone breaks what lasted, they show you how little they plan to keep. By evening, I had the front room arranged like a stage. I texted them both, discussion at 6. Witnesses present. Cyrus arrived with a deacon and my neighbor. 3 sets of neutral eyes. I placed chairs square, stacked bank letters atop titles, and set a recorder in plain sight. My palms pressed flat to the table. Breath even. Grief sat beside me, but so did resolve. You don't need a loud voice if the facts are standing at attention. They walked in, full of restless energy. I began with the banker's confirmation denied access attempts, time-stamped and clear. Then I slid the title copies and bank letters across the wood. Cyrus read aloud the defects in their earlier papers, his voice firm but measured. Finally, I pressed play on my recorder. Darian's voice crackled through the speaker, bragging to a notary about fast-tracking transfers. His own words sealed the room. I looked at him once, then said the only line that mattered. Ownership is settled. So is my boundary. A clean truth doesn't shout, it closes. They left without signatures, and without victory, and without my keys. The air in my house grew lighter as their footsteps faded. Tomorrow, the whispers would spread, and with them, the consequences they never planned to face. The morning after the sit-down felt heavier than most. My phone rang before breakfast. Voices tumbling over each other, neighbors, church friends, even a woman I hadn't spoken to in years. Each said some version of the same thing people are talking about last night. Word about Darian's scheme spread fast, as it always does in Charleston, quietly over kitchen tables, loudly in parking lots, at the grocery store. One woman gave me a small nod of respect, while a cousin hurried past without meeting my eye. Gossip is a blade, I thought, and it cuts both ways. I brewed tea, fed the birds outside, then sat with my journal to write a reminder to myself. Hold steady, breathe, and let the truth walk on its own feet. When truth walks into the light, it casts long shadows on those who lied. By midday, I made my way to the Baptist church hall for the luncheon. The aroma of fried chicken and sweet rolls filled the space, but the mood was charged. Isolde, all smiles and airs, tried to spin things, laughing off the previous night Odessa's just misremembering paperwork. The deacon who'd witnessed everything cleared his throat. His words were simple but sharp. I saw what I saw. The room hushed. Relatives shifted in their seats, some sliding away from Isolde's table. Darian entered late, shoulders stiff. An elder man near the punch bowl muttered, not softly, "A son ought to honor his mother, not rob her." The sting of that sentence settled deep. Eyes flicked toward me, some pitying, some approving, others judging. I kept my plate steady, ate with calm hands. In the South, reputation isn't built by speeches. It's built by what neighbors whisper after you leave the room. That afternoon, Cyrus met me on the courthouse steps, folder in hand. His expression was measured. The notary's service filed a report. He explained they marked Darian's attempt as suspected misrepresentation. It may fall under fraudulent conveyance. The words felt heavy, but they didn't surprise me. A clerk passing by gave a small nod, confirming the paperwork existed. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. I listened carefully, storing each term in my mind petition. Affidavit, hearing, Cyrus advised patients let the officials do their work. Across the square, Darian stood, pretending not to see me, his jaw tight, fists stuffed into his pockets. Justice moves slow, but its footsteps leave marks that can't be swept away. That night, my house returned me to silence. The broken clock pieces still rested in a plastic bag on the mantel. I sat at my table and wrote 3 truths in my journal. My name is on the house. My name is on the cars. My name is on the accounts. Those words steadied me more than any tea. I called Life before bed. Grandma's house is safe. I told him, you can always come here. His sigh of relief was the best sound I heard all day. Peace after battle is not silence. It's the discipline of remembering who you are. Just as I set the journal aside, headlights swept across my porch. When I opened the door, a sealed envelope lay on the mat, no return name, only my address typed clean. The paper was heavy, the seal unbroken. I held it in my hands, the night air cool against my skin. By dawn, I would break that seal and discover the one move Darian thought he could still win. At first light, I slit the envelope open on my porch with a butter knife. Inside lay an affidavit from the bank's fraud unit and a notary's incident report, each page marked with dates, call logs, and signatures that made the evidence breathe. I spread them flat across my kitchen table beside the house title in bank letters. My tea steamed in the corner, but I didn't sip for calm, only to mark a beginning. I snapped photos of the headers and sent them to Cyrus. His reply came quick. That's the last piece. Meet me at 11 when the truth shows up with a timestamp. You don't argue, you file. By mid-morning, Cyrus and I walked into the courthouse filing office. The linoleum floor shone dull under fluorescent lights, but to me it looked like a runway. Together we filed a petition for protective relief. Attaching the bank affidavit and notary report, I initialed page after page, steady as stone. At the DMV, a clerk keyed in a preventive hold on both car titles, ensuring any transfer would flash red. At the bank, a note was added to my account, no action without my passphrase and written order. Cyrus handed me drafts, a cease and desist, and a trespass warning. The sheriff's civil unit would serve them before sundown. Power isn't noise. It's paperwork that walks. Late afternoon, I stood 10 paces away from the Baptist church as a deputy crossed the sidewalk. Papers in hand, he approached Darian first. You're served, he said flatly. Placing the stack into my son's reluctant grip, Isolde reached out, hoping to control the narrative, but the deputy handed her a copy as well. The church bell struck the hour, and the sound felt like a gavel. I stayed where I was, neither hiding nor advancing. No speeches, no shouting, just the official thunder of paper. A verdict can be loud, but justice often clears its throat and hands you a folder. Before sunset, Darian showed up outside my fence, his voice pitched softer than usual. Mama, let's talk. Sign one paper and this can all go away. I kept the gate locked. All contact goes through counsel. You've been served, and I've been clear. He tried a new angle, mentioning his father, weaving sentiment like bait. I didn't flinch. Your father wanted me safe. The law is how I honor him. His shoulders sagged, silence replacing bluster. Mercy isn't letting the wolf in. It's closing the gate without gloating. That evening, I sorted the binders, home, vehicles, sahabas, bank, legal labeling spines with black marker. I carried the cracked mantel clock to Mr. Harlan's shop. He promised it could tick again. So can houses, I told him, smiling faintly. I called Leaf, telling him, Grandma's house is steady. The porch light stays on for you. I left a message for the deacon who'd spoken truth when it counted. Thank you. Back home, I brewed fresh tea, opened the windows, and let the marsh air flow through. Peace isn't the absence of trouble. It's the presence of boundaries you keep. As dusk settled, my phone buzzed. A text from Cyrus Judge granted the temporary order. We'll finalize next week. Another ping followed Leaf's small message. Grandma, can I stay over Friday? I set out 2 cups on the counter, then chuckled and put one back. I flipped on the porch light, locked the gate, and felt the choice settle in me like stone. Tomorrow, I would change the locks on the doors, and on the parts of me that ever mistook silence for surrender.